Hey everyone. Tonight we're traveling back to a time long before tweets, likes, or viral videos. A world where news traveled not through screens, but through whispers in taverns, songs sung in village squares, and the hurried footsteps of messengers across muddy roads. Imagine a world where a single rumor could change the fate of a village, where tales of miracles or misdeeds spread from town to town with the speed of a wildfire, and where stories shaped belief, fear, and hope alike. This is medieval Europe, a patchwork of kingdoms and fiefdoms where every whispered secret, every scandalous song, and every miraculous tale could sweep across the countryside, capturing imaginations and stirring emotions in ways that still echo today. It's a world where going viral meant something altogether different. It meant being heard, seen, and remembered by a community bound by shared fears, faith, and fascination. Tonight, you won't just learn about history. You'll step into the very human rhythms of a society where information was power, stories could save or ruin lives, and the simple act of passing a tale from one ear to another could change the course of events. You'll hear about songs too bold to be sung in public, miracles that turned whole towns into pilgrim destinations, and secrets whispered behind royal doors. So settle in, listen closely to the voices of a bygone age, and journey with me through a world where stories were more than entertainment. They were lifelines, warnings, and sometimes the sparks that set history ablaze. This is what going viral meant in medieval times and more. Welcome to a journey of rumor, magic, and the power of words. The origin of a village lead. In the quiet world of a medieval village, where stone cottages clustered close to the edge of dense forests and narrow dirt paths, communication was a delicate and vital art. Without parchment or printing presses, without postal services or broadcast signals, the lifeblood of news coursed through spoken word alone. It moved at the pace of footsteps and breath, carried by market chatter, shared under the creak of ancient oaks, and whispered across hayfields where laborers bent to their work. Every utterance held power, for in a place where survival hinged on trust and reputation, stories could build or break entire families. And so when a single phrase began to ripple through the village, it was less like a gust of wind and more like a slow-growing flame, subtle at first, but destined to consume the minds of all who heard it. At the heart of this phenomenon was the nature of the medieval community itself. Villages were small, often isolated, bound by kinship and custom, where everyone's life intersected in countless ways. Food was scarce, wealth rare, and social order strict. To belong was to be under constant scrutiny, where appearances mattered deeply, and words could secure protection or summon peril. In such a world, rumor was not merely idle gossip. It was a form of currency, a tool wielded to negotiate alliances, warn of danger, or cast doubt on rivals. But with no written record or authoritative fact-checking, the truth was fragile, easily bent by fear, envy, or simple misunderstanding. Consider a summer's afternoon, when the heat bore down and the hayfields glowed golden under a high sun. Laborers paused, wiping brows and exchanging news of crops and weather, when suddenly a startling story emerged. A traveler, unfamiliar, and speaking with a strange accent, was said to have been seen near the village edge. Some claimed the stranger carried a mysterious parcel, others whispered of secret meetings under moonlight. The tale, slight as it was, gathered weight with each telling. Voices lowered to urgent whispers, eyes darted with suspicion. The stranger became not just a visitor, but a figure of menace. How did such a rumor grow so swiftly in a world without swift communication? The answer lay in the social dynamics of the village. In the absence of official news sources, oral storytelling took on sacred importance. A story told once might be repeated 2 or 3 times before reaching the whole community. Each retelling adapted subtly to the teller's mood, memories, or desires. Like a game of broken telephone, details changed, sometimes enlarged, sometimes omitted, until the original fact became tangled with exaggerations and assumptions. This natural distortion was amplified by human psychology. Fear bred suspicion, uncertainty demanded explanations, even if fabricated. Yet not all rumor was born from malice. Often it served a communal purpose. In a precarious existence shaped by famine, disease, and feudal obligations, rumors helped to prepare villagers for dangers real or imagined. They reinforced social norms by highlighting the consequences of transgression and provided entertainment, a distraction from daily toil. At times, a rumor might even offer hope, a whispered promise of a miracle, a secret treasure, or the arrival of a savior. These stories, though not factual in a modern sense, were woven deeply into the fabric of medieval life. One critical feature of rumor in this era was its anchoring in physical places. The hayfields, the village well, the old chapel ruin. These became more than mere settings. They transformed into stages where stories played out and emotions gathered. When the rumor of the stranger took hold, the hayfields became the backdrop for hushed meetings, where elders exchanged cautious glances and farmhands passed along warnings. The landscape itself shaped how stories spread, limiting and directing the flow of information along paths where people naturally gathered. The power of rumor was such that it could alter the fate of individuals and entire communities. A whispered accusation could brand someone a thief, a heretic, or worse. In a time when written records were sparse and justice often arbitrary, words held immense sway. The village court might convene on the strength of gossip alone, and reputations could be shattered overnight. Yet, for all its danger, rumor was inseparable from the social order. It was a form of participation, a way for villagers to assert agency in a world controlled by distant lords and inscrutable fate. Medieval life depended on memory and oral tradition. Stories were passed down through generations, becoming part of collective identity. This transmission was never static. It adapted to new circumstances and needs. The rumor in the hayfields was not merely a lie or a mistake. It was an evolving narrative shaped by community concerns and hopes. In this way, going viral in medieval times was less about speed and more about resonance. A story that touched on shared fears or desires would find fertile ground, spreading slowly but inexorably until it became legend. It is tempting to imagine medieval villagers as simple folk, isolated and uninformed. Yet their mastery of communication was profound in its own way. The absence of written media did not mean ignorance, but rather a reliance on interpersonal trust and the rhythms of social life. In such a context, the very ambiguity of rumor could be a source of strength. It allowed flexibility, room for interpretation, and an outlet for collective imagination. While today's viral trends flash and fade within hours, the medieval rumor simmered, transformed, and endured, marking the social pulse of the village in ways both subtle and profound. As twilight descended over the hayfields, the story of the stranger continued to weave through the community. Some met it with curiosity, others with dread. It was a reminder that in a world without headlines or scrolls, words themselves were the most potent force, capable of creating allies or enemies, heroes or villains, reality or myth. To understand what going viral meant in medieval times is to recognize the deep human need to share stories, to connect and to make sense of a world filled with uncertainty and wonder. The Bard's Scandal, a song too bold for the road. In the dim glow of the village hearths, long after the work of the day had ended, the sound of a lute would often drift through the air. Bards, those itinerant singers and storytellers, were the bearers of news, history, and rumor alike. Their voices carried tales from distant lands and courtly intrigues, weaving together the fabric of shared memory and entertainment. Yet their power extended beyond mere amusement. Words sung in song or spoken in verse could unsettle rulers, ignite passions, and challenge the fragile order of medieval society. It was in this delicate balance that a single bold song could become a scandal that traveled faster than any rider or messenger. The role of the bard was multifaceted. While some found favor in the courts of nobles, others roamed from village to town, gathering alms and attention in equal measure. A bard's livelihood depended on an ability to captivate audiences, whether by recounting heroic deeds or by weaving sharp social commentary into melody. Because of this, bards often walked a fine line between praise and provocation. The tales they told, though entertaining, could carry veiled criticism or reveal uncomfortable truths. In a world ruled by hierarchy and strict social codes, such performances could stir unrest beneath the surface calm. One such scandal began with a song composed in a small market town, where the bard dared to sing a ballad not of knights and saints, but of the local lord's greed and cruelty. The verses sketched scenes of injustice, harsh taxes, broken promises, and the suffering of peasants under the weight of feudal demands. The chorus mocked the Lord's pretensions and questioned his honor, delivered with biting wit and undeniable melody. What might have been dismissed as mere entertainment in another age became a lightning rod in this moment, for the song struck at the heart of tension simmering beneath the village's polite surface. The spread of this scandalous song was both deliberate and accidental. Bards traveled from place to place, and as they performed in inns, marketplaces, and even along dusty roads, the song was learned by heart and carried onward. Villagers hummed the tune in secret, sharing its verses with a mix of amusement and fear. Those loyal to the Lord condemned the song as seditious and dangerous. Meanwhile, the oppressed found in it a rare voice for their grievances, a validation of suffering too often ignored. Through this transmission, the song became more than music. It became a catalyst for conversation, reflection, and eventually, resistance. In a time before printing presses or newspapers, the oral transmission of songs and stories was the primary way news moved beyond local boundaries. A single bard could bring tales from the capital to remote hamlets, knitting disparate communities together through shared narrative. Yet, this oral culture was fluid. Each performance was shaped by the bard's style, the audience's mood, and the context in which the song was sung. Like a living organism, the song could grow sharper, more humorous, or more critical with every telling, gaining new verses or losing others. This adaptability was both a strength and a risk. The bard had to master the art of knowing what to say and when to say it. The consequences of singing a dangerous song were very real. Bards who crossed certain lines risked arrest, exile, or worse. In some regions, laws forbade the spreading of seditious or heretical ideas, and a bard's song might be deemed a crime against the ruler's authority or the church's teachings. But the threat of punishment did not stop these storytellers. For many, the power of their voice and the need to speak truth to power outweighed the dangers. This tension between control and expression defined much of medieval culture, revealing the complex relationship between art, politics, and community. The scandal of the Bard's song also reveals how medieval society understood information and influence. Without the mass media we know today, reputation and rumor were vital currencies. A song's power lay not only in its lyrics, but in the trust and shared experiences of the listeners. When a community recognized their own hardships reflected in verse, the song became a collective act of acknowledgement. It validated feelings often silenced by the rigid hierarchies of the time. This communal resonance gave the song a force beyond words, shaping attitudes and, occasionally, inspiring action. Moreover, the Bard's scandal shows how medieval people navigated authority and dissent. In public spaces, deference to lords and clergy was expected, but in the more private or liminal settings, the tavern, the marketplace, the road, the boundaries loosened. Here, voices could rise in song, laughter, or whispered conspiracy. The Bard, moving between these worlds, acted as a mediator, a provocateur, and sometimes a mirror reflecting society's contradictions. This dual role underscores the dynamic and often precarious place of storytelling in medieval life. The echoes of that scandalous song endured long after the Bard had moved on. It became part of the village's oral heritage, referenced in conversations and recalled in moments of hardship or celebration. The story of the song itself, how it challenged power and gave voice to the voiceless, became a legend. In this way, going viral in medieval times was not a matter of technology or speed, but of meaning and memory. How a single song could ripple across communities and years, shaping identity and history in subtle, profound ways. The wishing well that worked, pilgrims at the miracle pool. In the heart of medieval Europe, nestled among rolling hills and ancient forests, there were places that captured the imagination and devotion of many. Wells and pools said to possess miraculous powers. These sites became focal points of faith and hope, drawing pilgrims from near and far. One such place, known simply as the Miracle Pool, gained renown not only for its reputed healing waters but for the stories it inspired. Stories that spread far beyond its quiet village, becoming a phenomenon that, in its own way, could be described as going viral in the medieval world. The belief in sacred wells and springs was deeply rooted in the medieval mindset, shaped by a blend of Christian piety, lingering pagan customs, and the human longing for tangible signs of divine favor. Water, as a symbol of life, purity, and renewal, held a central place in religious practice. Pilgrims seeking cures for ailments, relief from suffering, or answers to desperate prayers journeyed to these sites, often enduring long and difficult travel. The miracle pool was one such destination, its waters said to have the power to grant wishes, heal the sick, or even bring the dead back to life. The origin of the miracle pool's reputation was modest and somewhat mysterious. Local tradition spoke of a simple farmer who, during a harsh winter, stumbled upon a small spring bubbling in a clearing. When the farmer's sick child drank from the water, the illness faded as if by magic. Word of this event spread quickly through the village, and soon others came seeking the pool's blessings. Over time, the pool became a shrine of sorts, with a modest wooden cross and a handful of tokens left by grateful pilgrims. These acts of devotion served as both evidence and reinforcement of the pool's sacred status. As tales of the miracle pool's powers traveled beyond the village, the site attracted increasing numbers of pilgrims. Some came with genuine faith, others with curiosity, and a few perhaps with skepticism. Regardless of intent, the communal nature of pilgrimage, the shared hardship, ritual bathing, and prayer created a powerful social experience. Pilgrims exchanged stories, news, and rumors, and through this oral network, the fame of the miracle pool spread, reaching other villages and even towns miles away. This circulation of stories and reputation exemplified the medieval form of viral transmission, one based on human interaction and shared belief rather than technology. The experience of visiting the miracle pool was as much about community as it was about individual healing. Pilgrims often traveled in groups, forming temporary bonds through shared hardship and hope. Upon arrival, the wellspring was surrounded by simple shelters and altars, tended by local caretakers who maintained the site and organized prayers. The pool itself, a small, clear basin framed by moss-covered stones, was approached with reverence. Visitors would often leave tokens, ribbons, coins, or carved wooden figures in gratitude or supplication. These tokens, visible to all, became a testament to the pool's ongoing miracles and encouraged others to seek its waters. Healing miracles reported at the pool ranged from small ailments to extraordinary recoveries. Chronic pain, blindness, and lameness were among the conditions said to be relieved after contact with the water. The collective testimony of pilgrims, passed from mouth to mouth, reinforced the belief in the pool's power. This oral tradition also allowed the stories to grow and evolve, sometimes incorporating elements of the miraculous into everyday life. A tale of a blind man regaining sight might become embellished with celestial visions or encounters with angels, adding layers of wonder and significance to the original event. The religious authorities of the time held a complex relationship with such miracle sites. While the church sought to regulate and sometimes suppress folk beliefs that bordered on superstition, it also recognized the importance of pilgrimage in reinforcing faith and devotion. In some cases, official clergy endorsed certain wells or springs, incorporating them into the wider network of holy sites. In others, skepticism and caution prevailed, especially if the site threatened ecclesiastical authority or was linked to unorthodox practices. The miracle pool, located near a modest parish church, managed to maintain a delicate balance, benefiting from local clerical support without attracting direct scrutiny. Pilgrimage to the miracle pool also had an economic dimension. The influx of visitors brought commerce and opportunity to the village, encouraging the growth of inns, markets, and craftsmen. Local economies often depended heavily on the steady stream of pilgrims, who required food, lodging, and religious items such as holy water, rosaries, and relics. In this way, the miracle site became a focal point not only of spiritual life but of social and economic exchange. The stories of healing and divine favor, therefore, served multiple purposes, reinforcing faith while sustaining the community. Deep within the dense woodlands that bordered many medieval villages, where the sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy, there existed a shadowy presence, one that lingered on the edge of perception and memory. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of a creature seen in fleeting glimpses, glowing eyes watching from the darkness, a silent shape slipping between the ancient oaks and tangled underbrush. This being was neither fully understood nor easily dismissed. It occupied a place in the collective imagination, a living symbol of the unknown and the wild, a presence that shaped fears, stories, and beliefs. In this way, the phenomenon of the eyes in the forest became one of the most enduring viral tales of medieval folklore, shared and reshaped with each telling. Medieval forests were vast and mysterious landscapes. To those who lived in adjacent villages and hamlets, the forest was both a vital resource and a realm of danger. It provided wood for building, game for food, and plants for medicine, yet it also concealed predators, bandits, and supernatural forces. The boundary between the cultivated world and the untamed forest was never fixed, always shifting with the seasons, human activity, and the collective stories passed down through generations. The eyes in the forest were often reported during twilight or in moonlit nights, moments when vision faltered and imagination ran free. The glow of eyes, reflecting light from torches, stars, or even the moon itself, was interpreted in many ways. For some, these were the eyes of wolves, known to prowl in packs and threaten livestock and travelers alike. For others, they were the gaze of a more mysterious entity, a forest spirit, a demon, or a shapeshifter capable of crossing between the natural and supernatural worlds. The medieval mind was attuned to interpreting such phenomena through a complex blend of folklore, religion, and lived experience. Forests were often seen as liminal spaces, thresholds between the human realm and the unknown. The church sometimes warned against superstition, yet it also preached caution about the devil's work in wild places. Folklore offered explanations that ranged from cautionary tales to moral lessons. The creature behind the glowing eyes became a canvas on which fears of the dark, the wilderness, and the unfamiliar were projected. One common motif was the wild man or woodwose, a figure clothed in leaves or fur, living outside civilization but aware of its rhythms. These beings were neither wholly malevolent nor benign. They embodied the tension between nature and culture. Stories of encounters with the eyes in the forest often described fleeting moments, a sudden rustle, a pair of shining eyes reflecting torchlight, a shadowy shape vanishing behind a tree. Such accounts were shared at village gatherings, in taverns, and around fires growing with each retelling. The phenomenon also intersected with practical concerns. Reports of glowing eyes often accompanied warnings about wolves or bandits lurking near forest paths. Travelers were urged to be cautious after dark, and some villages organized watch groups to patrol forest edges. This blending of folklore and pragmatic response demonstrates how stories about the eyes in the forest serve both as entertainment and as vital information for survival. The spread of these stories followed the rhythms of medieval communication. Without printing presses or newspapers, word of mouth was king. A tale told around one hearth would find its way to another village by market day or festival, where it might be embellished or altered. Pilgrims and traders traveling through forested regions carried stories like seeds on the wind, planting them wherever they stopped. This process of transmission ensured that the legend of the eyes in the forest took on many forms, adapting to local fears, environments, and cultural contexts. In some areas, the eyes became associated with specific creatures, such as the elusive black cat or the enigmatic owl, both animals that carry symbolic weight across cultures. Owls, in particular, were linked to wisdom and witchcraft, their glowing eyes often the last sight of a traveler lost in the woods. The forest, alive with sounds and shadows, became a stage for human anxieties and hopes, a place where the boundaries between reality and imagination blurred. Art and literature of the time also reflected these themes. Manuscripts and tapestries sometimes depicted mysterious forest beings or animals with glowing eyes, capturing the eerie beauty and menace of the wild. These images reinforced the stories, embedding the eyes in the forest deeper into cultural memory. The symbolic power of eyes, windows to the soul, markers of presence, lent a haunting quality to the tales. The eyes in the forest also served as a reminder of the delicate balance medieval people lived with nature. The forest was a provider and a threat, a source of mystery and a space of order challenged. Respect and fear coexisted, influencing hunting practices, land use, and daily life. To see the eyes was to be reminded of this precarious relationship, a moment to pause and acknowledge the power of the unseen. The tale's enduring popularity lay not only in its mystery, but in its universal resonance. Eyes watching from the dark evoke a primal response: alertness, caution, curiosity. In medieval times, when the night was long and full of dangers unseen, such stories served to bind communities, sharing warnings and wisdom cloaked in narrative. The eyes in the forest were not just a creature of legend, they were a reflection of the human condition itself, navigating a world where light and shadow constantly shifted. In conclusion, the story of the eyes in the forest captures the essence of medieval life at the edge of civilization and wilderness. It illustrates how a simple phenomenon, a pair of glowing eyes in the dark, could grow into a powerful legend that traveled from village to village, going viral through word of mouth. This legend carried with it lessons about fear, respect, community, and the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of sight. In the flickering light of a fire or the quiet hush of a forest night, the eyes remind us that even in the darkest places, stories illuminate the human experience. The potion that cured too much, an alchemist's dangerous success. In the shadow chambers of medieval alchemy, where the boundaries between science, magic, and mystery blurred, tales often circulated of extraordinary potions, elixirs capable of healing the sick, extending life, or revealing hidden truths. Among these stories, one stands out: the tale of a potion so potent that it did not simply cure, but cured too much. This remarkable brew, concocted by an ambitious alchemist, spread like wildfire through towns and villages, leaving in its wake a mixture of hope, fear, and unintended consequences. Its story reveals much about the precarious relationship between knowledge, power, and belief in the medieval world. Alchemy in the Middle Ages was a complex pursuit, deeply entwined with spiritual and practical aims. Far from the crude experiments imagined in later centuries, medieval alchemists combined keen observation of natural phenomena with mystical philosophy. Many sought the philosopher's stone, a legendary substance said to transmute base metals into gold and grant eternal life. Others focused on the preparation of medicines and potions, blending herbs, minerals, and secret techniques in the hopes of curing diseases that baffled contemporary medicine. The origins of the infamous potion that cured too much trace back to a small town where an alchemist, driven by the desire to alleviate suffering, began experimenting with rare ingredients. Using knowledge gathered from Arabic scholars, classical texts, and local herbal lore, this figure developed a formula that promised miraculous healing. Word of this potion traveled quickly, carried by merchants, pilgrims, and travelers who tasted its effects or heard tales of recovery. The potion was remarkable for its broad efficacy. Those who drank it reported relief from fevers, wounds, and chronic ailments. Even conditions long thought incurable seemed to respond. Yet, as the potion's use became widespread, unexpected effects emerged. Some who consumed it found themselves cured not only of disease, but also of their vitality, their strength diminishing rather than restoring. Others experienced sudden, intense changes in mood or perception, as if the potion affected more than just the body. These side effects sparked concern and suspicion. The very success of the potion challenged accepted medical knowledge and religious beliefs. Healing was not simply a physical matter, but intertwined with divine will and the natural order. To intervene too deeply risked upsetting that balance. The potion, it seemed, was both a blessing and a curse, a dangerous success. Medieval authorities responded with caution. The church, wary of alchemical practices that bordered on heresy, investigated the potion and its maker. Local healers and apothecaries, threatened by the alchemist's growing reputation, spread rumors that the potion was unnatural, possibly cursed or crafted with dark magic. The alchemist faced accusations, and the potion's distribution was restricted, though underground use persisted. The story of this potion reflects broader themes in medieval society: the tension between innovation and tradition, the fear of the unknown, and the power of stories to shape perception. The potion went viral not merely because of its effects, but because it touched on deep hopes and anxieties, of illness and health, of control and surrender, of science and superstition. In time, the legend of the potion grew beyond its original context. It became a metaphor for remedies that promised too much, for the human desire to conquer nature and the consequences that follow. The potion's tale was told in market squares, taverns, and monasteries, evolving with each telling. Some claimed it could revive the dead. Others warned it brought madness. The reality of the potion's effects blended with myth, creating a story that endured centuries. Through this narrative, it becomes clear how medieval people understood and coped with illness. Healing was not only a matter of physical intervention, but a process embedded in social, spiritual, and cultural dimensions. The potion's dangerous success illustrated the risks of crossing boundaries between health and harm, knowledge and ignorance, faith and reason. Ultimately, the potion that cured too much remains a powerful example of how stories spread in medieval times, much like viral phenomena today. It shows that even in an era without modern communication, information, whether fact, fear, or fantasy, could travel swiftly and shape lives profoundly. The alchemist's brew, part miracle and part menace, reminds us that the search for healing has always been a journey through uncertainty, fraught with both promise and peril. Secrets of the royal bedchamber, a scandal from the throne, in the hushed corridors behind Castle Stone, where woven tapestries mute the secrets of power, few doors remain more closely guarded than those of the royal bedchamber. To the people beyond the moat, it stood as a symbol of divine rule and noble privilege. Yet within, it was something else entirely, an intimate stage upon which the quiet scandals of court life unfolded. The medieval monarch, believed by many to be chosen by heaven, remained deeply and uncomfortably human behind closed doors. And when scandal seeped from these chambers, it spread with a potency no decree could suppress. The notion of privacy in the medieval world bore little resemblance to its modern counterpart. Even the royal bedchamber, where sovereigns were meant to rest, was rarely free of attendants, advisors, and whispering eyes. Courtiers dressed and undressed rulers, clergy gave blessings at the bed's edge, and trusted stewards monitored health and hygiene. What was said and done in these quarters did not remain there long. One stray comment could find its way into the ears of a steward, a laundress, a page, and soon into the street. Scandals from the throne were not only titillating, but politically volatile. In a society built on fragile hierarchies and the appearance of divine favor, a rumor born in the bedchamber could unseat alliances, fracture kingdoms, or invite war. Whispers of illegitimacy, of favoritism shown to unworthy companions, or of strange behavior beneath royal sheets, were taken with the seriousness of prophecy. And when tongues wagged, they rarely stopped. One such scandal began not with a shout, but a cough, heard at the wrong hour by the wrong ear. A visiting noble, lodged in an adjacent solar, heard movement late in the night. Not unusual in the labyrinthine hours of courtly life, but notable was the voice, low, familiar, and not belonging to the queen. The next morning, the court buzzed under its breath. An extra goblet on the royal table, a wrinkled corner of the bed that hadn't been there at sundown, a brooch left behind and quickly hidden. Such details, trivial alone, accumulated like flint to dry straw. In medieval courts, the truth was rarely the whole truth. What mattered more was the perception, the narrative shaped by chroniclers, jesters, and servants' gossip. Once the idea of a royal betrayal took hold, it became nearly impossible to extinguish. Chroniclers, those semi-official writers tasked with preserving royal history, often embroidered their manuscripts with veiled references and clever turns of phrase, designed to suggest impropriety without naming names. The monarch's appetite outpaced the kitchen, one line reads in a court record, widely understood to imply nocturnal escapades beyond marital bounds. Royal scandals were not limited to infidelity. Sometimes, the shame lay in the vulnerability of the sovereign. Night terrors, sleep-talking, the need for a warming maid through the winter. Any weakness, physical or emotional, observed by staff could be weaponized by rivals. And if the scandal did not exist organically, it could always be invented. An empty bed one morning, or a change in morning routine enough to set a fire burning in the minds of the suspicious. Even in moments of innocence, power's proximity bred danger. A servant caught entering at the wrong time, a misplaced letter, a gift too personal, all could ignite suspicion. Once accused, denial only fed the fire. It was widely understood that to deny too loudly was to admit in silence. Monarchs learned to live amid the smoke of speculation, some indifferent, others suffocated. Religious expectations added another layer to these tales. Kings and queens were not merely rulers, they were spiritual examples. Their bedrooms, like their crowns, were expected to uphold the sanctity of Christian marriage. A scandal from the throne was not only a matter of gossip, but of sin. Confessors heard and recorded more than just prayers. The church, both watchful and manipulative, could elevate or crush a monarch, depending on how such whispers aligned with ecclesiastical goals. Yet the people loved a royal scandal. Far from court, peasants passed exaggerated versions over firelight. In bustling towns, ballads were sung in coded verses. In alehouses, patrons wagered over names, places, and outcomes. The throne was distant, yet its scandals were intimate. They brought royalty down to earth, made lords more like laborers and queens more like milkmaids. Even those suffering under taxes and law found a strange comfort in knowing that behind the velvet curtain, rulers fumbled, lied, and longed like everyone else. Not every bedchamber scandal ended in disgrace. Some were absorbed into folklore, reshaped into parables of lust or punishment. Others vanished, suppressed by loyal scribes and buried in library vaults beneath layers of dust. But most persisted in some form, mutated through generations of retelling. What began as a single cough in the night might centuries later become the tale of a hidden lover locked in a trunk, or of a ghost who visited nightly, dressed in pearls and resentment. The royal bedchamber, then, was more than a place of sleep. It was the axis of vulnerability and power, of truth and invention. Every cough, every creaking floorboard, every servant's glance carried the potential to shape history. The public may never have seen the royal sheets, but they knew how to imagine them. Stained with betrayal, embroidered with excess, lined with longing. In the quiet reflection of this tale, it becomes clear how stories traveled and thrived in the Middle Ages. Without parchment or printing press, information clung to rumor and breath. Scandal was the lifeblood of memory. And though kingdoms have risen and fallen since, one truth remains eternal. The closer power sleeps to desire, the more the world listens at the door. Born under a falling star, the miracle child. In the deep of a cloudless night, while frost glazed the thatch of every rooftop and silence hung heavy upon the sleeping earth, a long silver streak tore across the sky. It burned briefly, too bright for its place in the heavens, and then vanished. To the few who saw it, it was more than light. It was omen. And for those who woke before dawn in the eastern hamlet, the first cry rising from the edge of the hayfield seemed not born of the ordinary world, but pulled down from that very arc of fire in the sky. The tale spread first among those with cold feet and aching joints, those already up, tending coals or carting milk before the cocks crowed. A figure, small and swaddled in wool and wrapped in a mystery, had been discovered lying where the scorched grass still steamed faintly from the passage of the star. No footsteps around it, no trail leading in, just the frost, the burnt patch, and the sound of breath not yet bound to words. In most places and most times, an abandoned child was tragedy, a burden, a dark question with no certain answer. But not that morning, not in this village. The timing aligned too well with the sky, the silence too thick with reverence. Those who laid eyes on the scene lowered their voices without being asked. It felt holy, or at least worthy of care beyond logic. It wasn't long before someone whispered the word miracle, and once said, the word refused to leave. Medieval minds, steeped in divine cause and cosmic order, sought meaning in everything. A star that fell and a child that rose in the same breath? That was not accident. It was narrative. It was God or fate, or the restless spirits of the saints at work in the world again. And as with many things in that age, the truth mattered less than the shape the story took. It became something to believe in, something to repeat. Over the next days, people walked from nearby settlements not for trade or prayer, but for a glimpse. Some came barefoot out of reverence, some with dried herbs and offerings of milk and coins. A few cried without understanding why. The figure who had first been wrapped in found linen soon lay upon a cot of woven wool in the old chapel, surrounded by flickering tallow and the low drone of Latin recitations. There was no law to govern it, but a kind of order emerged from awe. No one questioned it directly. The story had taken root too fast. Tales grew like ivy. First, that the child had not cried, not once. Then that the birds had flown lower that morning. One person insisted the frost had vanished in a perfect circle around the hay. Another said a fox had knelt before running off. It was impossible to verify, but that wasn't the point. The story wasn't about proof, it was about need. Medieval communities hungered not just for food, but for connection to a world beyond their toil. Pilgrimages were made for less, and so this small figure born from fire became a destination. Word passed from carts to cloisters, from millers to monks. Eventually, someone painted the scene in ink upon a scrap of vellum, a crude falling star, a bundle in grass, ringed by halos and beasts. By then, the narrative had outpaced the facts. The local reeve, uncertain of how to record such an event, scrawled something into the manorial rolls. Skyfire above East Field, blessed sign, child found. Even such an austere note carried power. Once a thing entered the record, it acquired a sort of permanence. And permanence invited visitors. Merchants paused their routes to glance through the chapel door. Pilgrims veered off course. One night, a troupe of jongleurs camped nearby and composed a ballad. The refrain traveled far. In towns where the field and chapel were never seen, people still knew the chorus. The tale detached from its source and roamed on the breath of strangers. It wasn't only strangers who kept the tale alive. The villagers, drawn into the orbit of belief, began to see signs everywhere. A sickle broke clean along the edge, a blessing. A loaf rose higher in the oven, divine favor. Rain fell softly after drought, providence. Any kindness or luck was traced back to the child beneath the star. Of course, as with all things that grow too large, shadows formed around the edges. A few muttered doubts, quietly at first. Was it truly divine, or was it merely strange? Had the tale grown too fast, too far? But doubt in the open could be dangerous. This was no small matter. It had become a local economy, a spiritual anchor, a shared identity. What had started as curiosity had swelled into myth. The village, once unknown, now appeared in marginalia of monastic letters and bishopric itineraries. A traveling friar was said to have taken relic dust from the hayfield. A noble retainer made an offering of silver in hopes of fertility. Each act added to the legend, even as the details blurred. Years passed. The figure grew, but the miracle story never did. It stayed frozen in time like a song's first note, or the flash of a comet remembered long after the light faded. To some, the figure had the gift of stillness. To others, an aura of grace. But no matter how life changed, the tale never allowed the figure to be ordinary. Eventually, chroniclers folded the event into larger texts. In one parchment, it nestled between the great eclipse and a failed harvest. In another, it followed an account of a black dog seen at midsummer. The miracle was never disproven because it was never really questioned. It had become too beloved, too ingrained. Elixir of the Damned, when magic gets popular. In an age when the line between healing and heresy was as thin as a bone splinter, the promise of a universal elixir held irresistible allure. This was the medieval world, one of candles, cavities, pilgrimage roads, and whispered prayers. Into that world stepped an elixir, whispered to cure all ills, famine, plague, madness, even death itself. Known as the elixir of the damned, its fame spread rapidly through market squares and cloister cellars alike, not because of parchment or print, but through breath, rumor, and the shared hunger for hope beyond mortal bounds. Alchemy in medieval Europe was a tapestry woven with threads of mysticism, early science, and lingering pagan lore carried from Arab lands. The alchemists sought the transformation of base metal into gold, yes, but also transmutation of the human condition. The elixir of the damned was an audacious claim. A single draught could purge every poison, heal every wound, mend every broken spirit. It promised a miraculous mastery over mortality itself, not through divine grace, but through human cunning. It was a dangerous promise, and that danger fueled its spread. The elixir's origins were murky. Some said it came from the sermons of a wandering hermit who specialized in healing waters. Others pointed to a hidden scholar who had studied lost manuscripts in a Moorish library. Still others whispered of negotiation with spirits in dark wood and sealed tomb. Whoever first uttered its name did so quietly, yet the words traveled fast. A merchant returning from the east spoke of a bottle small enough to fit in a leather pouch and so potent that a single drop could cure blindness. A wandering student carried tales of its use at a noble court to halt a bleeding epidemic. And as happens in whispered economies, people began to believe they too could obtain it. Its popularity came not only from the promise of healing, but from fear's companion, Desperation. This was an era of recurring plagues, crop failures, and ceaseless feudal taxes. In such desperation, rumor grows roots, reaches deeper, spreads faster. No monastery could confirm it. No doctor could verify it. The elixir lived in stories of transformation. A servant girl healed of boils, a blacksmith's arm restored, a soldier's madness stilled. Villages became springboards for legend. Every rumor about it added weight. Soon the elixir was not just a potion, it was collective longing, crystallized in glass. People traveled miles for it. Some paid with goods, others with promises of patronage or servitude. A few disappeared en route. No regulator stood to check the authenticity of the brew or the credentials of its peddlers. Some spent their last coin and received only water. Others reported genuine comfort, though whether from magic or placebo, no one could say. The stories multiplied. The moonlit exchange at a crossroads, the cure delayed until after midnight, the recipient writhing in ecstasy. These were the origin stories of myth, the foundations of viral fame in a world that tested truth with breath, not pages. The church, wary of any authority not under its domain, grew uneasy. Officially, it denounced the elixir as devil's brew, magic masquerading as miracle. Stories were told of those who drank and lost their sense, who saw visions of demons, who danced naked at midnight. Clerics preached against it, bishops issued circulars, local priests warned their flocks. But rumor is not easily caged. The more authorities rejected it, the more potent it became, a forbidden fruit for the desperate and the curious. Though banned in many places, the elixir continued to spread. Underground apothecaries sold guesswork potions, claiming secret recipes. Some purchased bottles sealed with wax and stamped with unfamiliar symbols. It was a parallel economy, with contracts signed in blood or whispered oath, not ink. Like a virus, it evolved. New ingredients added, rituals defined, chants memorized. The medicine men who sold it became traveling figures, part charlatan, part prophet, part miracle worker. Followers reported that baptismal water could serve as base, or that a certain herb grown under full moon amplified effect. The recipe shifted by town, county, and storyteller, but the name remained intact. Why did this elixir endure? It tapped into a medieval truth. Suffering was not just physical. People believed that pain and illness were woven with spiritual decay. To heal the flesh was not enough. One needed to heal the soul. The elixir of the damned promised just that. It claimed power over body and spirit, transcending human capacity. Its narrative slipped through cracks left by war and famine, whispered in candlelight and passed across market benches. It was a rumor that became ritual. The consequences were real. Some who believed too fervently abandoned real remedies. Farmers left plagues of livestock unchecked. Pilgrimage offerings declined. A few villages even banned healers who treated burns or childbirth, claiming the elixir superior. In one recorded tale, an elixir peddler was found dead in a ditch, poisoned, some said by clergy, cursed, others whispered by the damned he had sold hope to. The rumor became tool and weapon employed by rival healers or suspicious authorities. Yet despite rejection and death, the legend lived on. It reached monasteries and university halls, creeping into marginalia. A scholar noted that belief in universal cure reflected a deeper anxiety about mortality. A chronicler recorded another eclipse as the moment the elixir was last seen. In some chronicles, the story ends with an image, a midwife shaking a clay vial within a dying hearth, unsure whether to keep it or spill its final drops for one last miracle. Centuries later, long after the original ingredients were forgotten, the tale resurrected in folk ballad, "Drink deep, all ye sinners," and later in medievalist tales of witches and enchanted springs. The core myth remained, a potion, more powerful than prayer, intoxicating in both promise and peril. It became a cautionary example of magic that grows beyond its maker, a virus of hope that infects the soul. In our times, when viral content is measured in likes, streams, and retweets, the elixir of the damned reminds us that the mechanics are ancient. A compelling narrative, a spark of fear or hope, and no means to verify, yet human longing fills the gaps. The potion's true power lay not in curing bodies, but in revealing how deeply humans crave certainty, how easily rumor becomes belief, and how the unknown, when packaged as miracle, spreads faster than any messenger. The missing bone, a holy relic, disappears. In the hush before dawn, pilgrimage banners snapped in the wind outside the local abbey. their colors pale under torchlight that glimmered against ancient stone. Pilgrims from distant counties had traveled along winding paths to reach this holy place, drawn by the promise of divine intercession through a relic so powerful that miracles were said to spring from its very presence. Known simply as the Holy Bone, it lay encased beneath glass and jewels, its identity sacred yet ambiguous. Yet one day, it vanished, stolen or spirited away. The question cast a long shadow, far deeper than the empty reliquary it left behind. Relics in medieval Christendom were more than objects. They were bridges connecting the earthly and divine realms, physical conduits of grace worthy of pilgrimages, processions, and prayer. The Holy Bone, claimed to be a fragment of a saint's skeleton, held immense sway over both spiritual and secular life. Pilgrims came seeking relief from plague, injuries, infertility, despair. Local rulers welcomed them, for where pilgrims went, commerce and prestige followed. Craftsmen and innkeepers prospered under their patronage. The abbey grew rich in alms and offerings. Its disappearance, therefore, felt like a rupture. In the early hours of the morning, the glass box lay unbroken, the ornate stand unmoved, but the bone was gone. Murmurs rose with the sun. Had a catapult of fate taken it? Or had thieves, enabled by rumor and greed, stolen it in the night? The abbey began an inquiry. Records were checked, candlesticks realigned, locksmiths were summoned, yet no replacement appeared. News carried beyond cloisters into villages and towns. Merchants paused at markets. Some spoke in sympathetic tones, others in whispers of scandal. Was the bone taken for profit or for sacrilege? A few voices daringly blamed higher powers, divine anger, demonic trickery, or celestial testing of faith. And with every retelling, the tale expanded. Rumor claimed footprints leading toward the forest, or lantern lights in the dead of night near the shrine. By midday, the abbey's silence weighed heavier than the relic's absence. This moment, the vanishing was not only a theft, it was a viral spark. Like a pebble dropped in still water, shockwaves radiated from the abbey, reaching towns, manors, and homes. Priests preached stern sermons on temptation. Chroniclers scribbled terse annals. Relic departed. Pilgrimages diverted. Rival shrines saw influxes as needs sought alternative outlets. Politics shifted too. A local baron used the moment to challenge the abbey's influence, while the bishop began inquiries that questioned clerical privilege. In that single morning, the relic's disappearance became a catalyst for change. The story grew richer than the bone itself. One version spoke of masked monks caught fleeing with a satchel. Another hinted at conspirators, heretics, or noble rivals. Some claimed the saint had chosen to leave, like a spirit withdrawing its favor. More fanciful tales detailed how a weeping pilgrim stole the bone to cure a dying child. Arguments raged in scribbled letters, in taverns, and in market squares. Medieval society depended heavily on relics, not only for faith, but for identity and economy. The relic's power lay in belief, reinforced by miracles, cures, visions, answered prayers. Without the bone, doubt emerged. Could the shrine still intercede? Should pilgrims continue their journeys? How must the abbey perform penance to restore the link? These questions precipitated a communal crisis. A stolen relic wasn't only a crime, it was theological. It demanded repentance, ritual reparation, even rededication ceremonies. A visible solution was needed to restore confidence and order. Local clerics responded. The abbot announced a solemn procession to reconsecrate the empty altar. Bells were rung in every parish. Pilgrims were encouraged to leave tokens and prayers before the reliquary, even in its emptiness. Some accounts later suggest this act of collective mourning and hope produced a minor miracle, a faint healing among gathered pilgrims, reaffirming faith even without the bone. This communal response exemplified medieval resilience. Even when symbols failed, the act of belief carried forward. The narrative shifted again when rumors circulated that the bone had been found a day's journey north. A rival abbey claimed to have discovered it buried beneath a tree, hidden in a secret chest. Its monks spoke of visions guiding them, of angels in their dreams. Scholars and clerics debated authenticity. A council convened, emissaries traveled, relics were scrutinized. Pilgrims faced a dilemma. Which site held truth? Which shrine held power? Some chose to believe both, their faith unfettered by duplication. Others shifted loyalty. Merchants followed, establishing new roads between alleys and shrines. Officials wrote letters asking for proofs of authenticity. Bones and relic boxes were compared, inscriptions examined. The relic story, from disappearance to alleged rediscovery, had spread like wildfire across networks of belief, travel, and trade. The horse of 7 markets, a beast everyone knew. In the flickering light of lanterns along cobbled streets, and in the first pale glow of dawn over muddy pastures, a story traveled that transcended the boundaries of town charters and county lines. It began with a horse, large, dark-coated, with a white star marking its brow, that appeared first in one market, then in another, until it came to be known simply as the Horse of 7 markets. News of this beast spread not by herald's trumpet, but by the voices of merchants, innkeepers, drovers, and travelers. On fair days and dusty roads, the horse's name drifted into every conversation like a whispered promise of wonder. Markets were the medieval world's social networks, hubs not only for corn and cloth, but for rumor, news, and connection. Every week, farmers and traders traversed long distances to buy, sell, or barter. They carried produce and livestock, yes, but also stories. A beautiful damaged sword, a peddler's foreign coin, or the tale of a political marriage, it all wove into the marketplace tapestry. When the Horse of 7 markets arrived, it brought quiet fascination. The horse was beyond ordinary, tall as 2 men, yet slender and sinuous, calm as midnight, yet alert as dawn. Among farmers, that meant strength and endurance. Among children, it ignited awe. Among cynics, it sparked suspicion. The horse was no common gelding. It was something more. A week after its first appearance, the horse had walked through 6 markets, each trader uttering details refined through repetition. In Candyford's Tuesday Fair, the horse knocked over a barrel of apples with a single step, as if testing gravity. In Hamilton, it refused grain until a child approached forward with handfuls of clover. In Tressmore, the creature chose its own rider, a woman of few words whose name was not recorded. No one forced her to ride. The horse simply accepted her. Such details drifted away from facts and into legend. The horse was selective, intelligent, soulful. The pace of rumor in medieval marketplaces was swift but layered. Knowledge arrived not by ship or courier, but breath to ear, across benches, behind stalls, over barrels, while coins clinked and benches were wiped. Each teller added embellishments. One claimed the horse had a hoof that never left tracks. Another insisted it neighed in an ancient tongue. Yet another said it glowed barely at dawn, like a star fallen to earth. Versions varied, but all pointed to one thing. This horse was impossible. Yet skepticism remained. Some argued that the horse belonged to a traveling nobleman seeking to dazzle common folk. They pointed out the horse's collar of red leather and brass fittings, expensive, visible, unmistakably human. Others whispered darker possibilities, hired enchantress, beast touched by witch's charm, devil's messenger. That variety of explanations only fueled further fascination. If the horse was enchanted, who had done it? If it was noble's pride, which lord? Each suggested answer invited new questions and new versions of the story. The horse's true power lay not in flesh and bone, but in its story. It was a thread made of collective awe, skepticism, and the desire for wonder. That thread bound together distant towns and pastures, linking hamlets that otherwise might never share news. A farmer in one town leaned on a fence, recounting how the horse had pawed the ground without trampling grass. A brewer in another scribbled rumors on a ledger margin. Horse that knows prayers? A traveling bard, at a fair somewhere east of 4 Valleys, composed a short verse about the horse's 7 walks. All these versions traveled faster than the horse itself ever could. The notion of going viral in medieval terms depended on repetition, resonance, and mobility. The Horse of 7 markets spread because it touched on collective desires for beauty, mystery, anomaly, spectacle. Life in the Middle Ages, hard, unpredictable, made space for wonder as respite. A special animal, moving across the land with unclear purpose, became that respite. It invited hope, speculation, and conversation. Just as today's viral video depends on shareability and emotion, the horse depended on people stopping, turning, asking, and asking again later. Local scribes and small-time chroniclers began to note the horse. A cartulary in Monksbridge Abbey recorded, strange roan steeds seen in 7 fairs, no owner named, horse quiet and well-tended. Another rural rector wrote, many children gathered, creature let them stroke mane, then trotted off into mist. These records, though sparse and localized, served as social proof. They anchored rumor in parchment, even poetically. After all, when cemented in writing, however small and informal, a rumor achieved persistence. It became part of shared history. Yet the horse remained free. After the seventh market, it vanished. But no stallion that mighty could simply disappear. But disappear it did. Rumors of theft, death, or enchantment circulated. Some claimed a gilded carriage appeared when the horse left, carrying its rider away. Others said it trotted into the sea at sunrise, an impossible sight. Some villagers built small shrines by market routes, offering grain and carnations in hopes it might return. For years, those shrines were visited, blessed by priests, prayed over under breath. As the horse slipped into legend, its popularity shifted in form. What once sparked curiosity became allegory. The creature came to represent the unknowable boundaries between human, animal, divine. A poor woman's tale recounted how she met the horse in a wood near a holy well. It knelt before her and whinnied softly, leaving her unborn child unharmed. A herd of common horses followed its path for months, as if tracking its presence. These stories were recorded in margins and songs, often without explicit reference to the original seven markets. They echoed the original but pressed deeper into symbolism. In time, the Horse of Seven Markets emerged in sermons and poems. Clerics spoke of it as a sign of humility, beautiful yet untamed. Poets compared its journey to that of lost souls seeking grace. Thinkers used it as an example. Some stories matter less for factual accuracy and more for their power to unite, inspire, perplex. Monks, record books, and itineraries acknowledged its path. Folk tales turned it into moral lesson or symbol of divine incursion into mundane reality. Its path through markets became mythic circuit, seven a number tied to completeness and spiritual significance. Even as the horse itself vanished into time, its story endured. Centuries later, a wandering antiquarian recorded that locals still told of the beast at harvest feasts. An 18th century ballad, penned far from the site, described a dark horse rising up in moonlight. Though elaborate retellings transformed its details, at the heart remained something inexplicable, a creature that moved across real places, in real time, and yet remained mysterious. It continued to travel, within stories, dreams, notes. The journey of the Horse of Seven Markets illuminates medieval virality in its purest form. It was not born of media logistics, but of shared wonder, spoken transmission, and a society open to marvel amid hardship. It reveals not only how stories spread, but why people passed them on, for distraction, for awe, for connection, and perhaps also for a touch of magic in an unpredictable world. The Beast in the Mist, a mythical creature's tale. In the hours just before dawn, when the mist curled thick as wool through the hollows of the forest and over the fens, stories stirred. Breath hung in the air like ghosts. Even the trees stood silent. In that half-light between night and morning, between waking and dream, many swore a figure moved. Neither beast nor man, neither spirit nor shadow, just the hint of something unnatural slinking along the edge of sight, vanishing into fog before certainty could settle. Long before books bound ideas to vellum, truth had wings, and no story traveled faster than a whisper of something terrible seen by someone trusted. It began, like many things did, in a place far from the important halls of record, a tract of land wrapped in bog and forest, where few traveled and fewer returned in haste. Those who worked its soil, fished its shallows, or watched flocks from the edges of the trees were used to silence. That silence was broken one season when the first story took root. It was not told with fanfare. It came in cautious words, in the pauses between labor and sleep. A creature had been seen, tall as a standing man, but moving like a beast, covered in bristle and wet with swamp water, eyes glowing pale as the moon, body moving without sound. At first, it was treated as a mistake. Too much sun, too little sleep, a log in the mist, a trick of the eyes. But the story repeated, then multiplied. Descriptions matched, locations overlapped, timings became impossible to ignore. The tale took form. Soon the villagers had a name for it, though the name itself was fluid. In one hamlet it was known for its eyes, in another for its stench. Some said it howled like a horn, others said it never made a sound, only watched. Yet all agreed on the feeling, a stillness, a suffocating weight in the air just before it appeared, as though the world held its breath and waited to see if it would pass by or draw closer. This was not the first time a beast had risen from the mists of Europe. Medieval folklore is thick with them. From the Barghest of the north to the church grims and water horses of the west, every landscape birthed its own monster. What made this one different was how quickly it spread. Word moved along trade paths, carried by pilgrims, tanners, and millers, passed between hands like bread at a common table. Soon, places that had never known the marsh began to speak of it as though it dwelled in their own woods. The church, always careful with myth, had little to say. Most clergy kept to doctrine, but a few saw use in fear. In some sermons, the beast became sin itself, walking the land as punishment. In others, it was a temptation, a trial for the faithful. Monasteries recorded the tale in margin sketches, a great horn shape, eyes like suns, legs too many or too few, depending on the artist's imagination. In every case, the message was clear. There was danger in the unknown, and the unknown was everywhere. The beast grew in telling. It began appearing in places it had never been. A cart overturned in fog was blamed on it. A missing cow, a strange scream in the night. In the absence of reason, the story offered explanation, and that, more than fear, made it powerful. It was a tool, one that shaped caution, morality, and the very contours of memory. Generations passed the tale like inheritance. Children learned to fear the mist. Elders sat closer to the hearth. Even when nothing stirred, the forest felt fuller. Of course, some sought to prove or disprove it. In one well-known episode, a small group ventured into the marsh to track it. They carried no steel, only charms and herbs, believing magic would repel magic. They returned pale and shaken, claiming nothing was found, but that they had been watched. They never went back. Another expedition brought hounds and torches and shouted the beast's name into the dark. All they found were birds and bog water. But the sightings continued. Artisans began to carve it into wood, to ink it onto walls, to weave it into tapestries. Its shape was never fixed, sometimes upright like a person, sometimes hunched like a beast. A hunched back became wings in one version, tentacles in another. The beast was everything it needed to be. That was the secret to its endurance. The villagers of one region remembered it as a pale, childlike figure with hollow eyes. Those across the river swore it was a stag made of bone and smoke. Each believed they were right. Each found meaning in their version. The beast served as warning. Don't wander too far. Don't light a fire in the wrong place. Don't steal from the shrine, or the beast will find you. It replaced the watchful eye of law in places where no sheriff walked. Even in towns where torches lit the night and walls offered safety, the story crept in. Market stalls whispered of distant cousins who saw something. A reeve once delayed a tax collection because the beast was reportedly nearby. That tale too spread. The beast now not just a threat, but an excuse. In rare cases, the beast was said to help. A lost child returned safely, claiming it was guided by a dark shape that led the way. A fire stopped at the edge of a barn, untouched while everything else burned. These stories made the creature more complex. Not wholly evil, perhaps. Not simply monster, just wild, just beyond understanding. And then, as suddenly as it had risen, the sightings dwindled. A generation passed with fewer stories. The land changed. Forests cut back, marshes drained, roads built. Certainty grew with the stones of churches and the ledgers of scribes. Fewer believed, fewer remembered. The beast became story, then legend, then footnote, but it never disappeared entirely. Even in the age of records and maps, travelers spoke of strange fogs and heavy silences, of lights in the trees, of hoofprints that ended mid-step. In some parishes, the old song still carried a verse or two about it. In old barns, ancient carvings remained. Figures scratched into wood where only those tending livestock would see them. Not decoration, protection. What was the beast? No one can say. Some believe it was a memory of real danger, wolves, disease, or war. Others claim it was a person once, twisted by tale into something more. A few insist it was never real at all, just the mind's answer to loneliness and fear in a world without explanation. But in the end, it does not matter. Real or imagined, the beast in the mist was believed. And belief, in medieval times, was enough to bring anything to life. The town crier's prophecy, words that changed futures. A hush spread through the square long before the crier stepped onto the wooden platform. Dawn had broken, but mist still curled around the stone fountain and cobbled stones. softening the edges of everyday life. Crowds gathered, merchants arranging wares, laborers pausing with bucket in hand, travelers stretching legs after long journeys, curiosity coursing through them. For when the town crier rang the brass bell, what followed would ripple far beyond that morning's routine. Words carried weight, and when those words claimed knowledge of what lay ahead, the possibilities shifted. Town criers held a unique place in medieval life. Their duty was to speak messages from the manor, the guild, or the crown. They proclaimed new laws, announced taxes, spread news of war or marriage, and let the people know when harvest fairs were set. Their voice, a clear, practiced voice, cut through the ambient noise of daily life, and ears leaned in. When a crier began not with law or decree, but with prophecy, the air changed. Not all prophecy came from holy men or learned monks. Sometimes it came from a voice in the town square, uttered in firm belief, trusted by ordinary people because it had been heard before. The prophecy in question had appeared slowly, a few cryptic phrases here, a murmured warning there. People spoke of cattle that would fail to yield, or of skies darkening too soon, or of roads littered with leaves in midsummer's heat. These words seemed disjointed, almost poetic yet unexpected, not from the local priest nor from the court astrologer. Then one morning, the crier climbed his stand, and with solemnity repeated lines lifted from rumor. When the sun meets the horizon twice before mid-autumn, the fields will thirst and rivers run dry. It sounded like folk verse, or an omen, depending on one's view. In a village that lived by seasons, such a statement could not be ignored. People listened. Farmers held their breath. Shopkeepers paused mid-sweep. Travelers leaned on their sacks, faces still sleepy. The prophecy had entered public space. Its echo rippled through the network of conversation that held medieval communities together. It wasn't only what the words said, it was who spoke them and where. In that moment, the boundary between rumor and authority became porous. Prophetic voices in medieval Europe were more common than records suggest. Not all of them were sanctioned. Some came from hermits or madmen, others from merchants who had read portents in comets or eclipses. Their messages might be disguised as poetry or charade to avoid accusation of sorcery. But prophecy was powerful. It could prepare, terrify, inspire, or all three. The town crier's blessing transformed a rumor into public knowledge. From that moment, it mattered. Soon, the prophecy shaped action. The reeve ordered watch on wells. The baker set aside extra flour against poor harvest. A woman with skill in small remedies was asked to gather water from the spring at dawn. Some regarded these actions with hope, others with suspicion. Was the crier delivering divinely informed foresight, or repeating superstition plucked from the wind? But even skepticism carried the prophecy forward. Talking about what might happen is, in itself, a way of enacting it. The prophecy traveled beyond the village. Traveling merchants carried it on to the next market. A lord passing through heard it from his steward and noted it in his ledger. A young apprentice traveling to the city repeated its lines, a poem to remember. Soon, a short version arrived in the scribe's hands. Sun twice in horizon, drought ahead. Even in a capital city, the words pulled attention. In a church there, a clerk paused over parchment, penciled the phrase into a sermon margin. There, prophecy became scriptural echo, an omen worthy of pondering. Winter approached without drought. The summer weather had been mild. Still, when the prophecy spoke of hardship, some interpreted that harvest might fail next year or return, but late. Others saw an allegory, a call to temperance, to charity, to civic care. Feasts were interrupted by thoughts of saving for lean days. Fields were weeded more thoroughly. Water vessels were filled and blessed. The prophecy shaped both fear and response, suggesting that belief, even in the absence of evidence, could produce vigilance. And then one day, it happened, or seemed to. A late summer heat wave dried the land unusually early. Wells sank low. Dust rose over the farmland. Animals were brought closer to streamside. The prophecy flickered into life, and its power returned. The crier once again recited the words, and quiet murmurs turned to affirmation. Food was rationed, relief shared. A communal meal was held, offerings brought to the chapel, sermon's message softened by mention of providence. All because words had suggested risk, and risk believed became real. The crier's words continued to echo. Historians later wrote of a prophecy that had saved a county from famine, not through prediction, but through change instigated by warning. But others cautioned it was luck or coincidence. Did words shape reality, or did reality shape words afterward? The medieval answer lay in faith. The boundary between human and divine, between rumor and revelation, was porous. The town crier who spoke that prophecy is not remembered. Records do not tell of identity, only of effect. But the story became part of regional lore, recorded by chroniclers appalled that a mere crier might wield such influence. They told of grains that ripened late and rains that held off as if in respect. They marveled at the simple power of words spoken at dawn to shift the daily routine of an entire community. In later generations, storytellers reframed the prophecy. They set it in dramatic time. Sun rose red twice in twilight. They added verses. They compressed meaning. Yes, the land lay thirsty, but let the people drink of unity. The prophecy remained, but its message grew. And yet its core was simple. Words whispered, broadcast believed, could shape destiny. This is how medieval rumors went viral, not through signals or seals, but through human ears and action. The prophecy became reality not because of supernatural sight, but because it was heard and acted upon. And perhaps that is the most powerful prophecy of all, that what is spoken deeply enough can come true, because people make it so. The feast that vanished, a stolen meal's legend. In the flickering glow of torches and candles, beneath the high timbered ceilings of a great medieval hall, preparations were underway for a feast destined to be remembered, not for its grandeur, but for its sudden disappearance. This was a night when food, family, power, and myth intertwined in a way that echoed far beyond the wooden walls of the manor house. The story of the feast that vanished began as a simple gathering, but it would grow to become a legend, whispered across villages and towns. A tale of loss, suspicion, and the invisible threads of rumor that tied medieval society together. Feasts in the Middle Ages were not merely occasions for eating. They were carefully choreographed performances of status and community, where the lord of the manor displayed wealth and generosity, and the guests, noble and common alike, reinforced social bonds and obligations. Food was both nourishment and spectacle. Roasted boars, fresh bread, sweet spiced wine, and pies filled with rich meats were laid out in abundance. Yet such extravagance was fragile, precarious, relying on supply chains stretched across fields, forests, and waterways, as well as on the trust of those who handled and guarded the precious provisions. On this particular evening, the manor's kitchen was alive with the scent of roasting herbs and baking bread. Cooks and servants moved swiftly in the dim light, passing platters heavy with pies and venison. The steward checked his list twice, making sure all was in place. The guests began to arrive, their chatter rising as they settled around the long oaken tables, the air thick with anticipation. The Lord himself took his seat at the high table, his cloak shimmering with embroidery, his eyes sharp and watchful. This feast was meant to mark a peace treaty, a union of families, a celebration that would cement alliances. But as the evening wore on, something strange began to unfold. The platters once full of delicacies grew emptier, the wine cups drained faster than expected. Servants moved between tables, replenishing with practiced ease until it became clear that the food was vanishing too quickly, even accounting for the many mouths. Whispers started, subtle at first. Who took the pies before the guests arrived? Has the pantry been plundered? The steward's face darkened with suspicion. The tale of the stolen feast spread quickly. Some blamed a band of thieves who had slipped through the shadows under cover of night. Others suspected disloyal servants, plotting in secret to sabotage the celebration. The Lord's knights were dispatched to search the surrounding woods and barns, torches cutting through darkness, but no culprits were found. The panic grew, and with it the story's reach. In medieval times, where written records were scarce and information moved slowly, stories like the vanished feast traveled by word of mouth, passed from lips to ears in inns, markets, and churchyards. Each retelling added new details, shaped by the teller's imagination, fears, or desires. A pie, once described as small and simple, might transform into a golden, jewel-encrusted delicacy. A few missing loaves could become an entire larder, emptied overnight. The feast, it seemed, had not only disappeared from the tables, but from reality itself. But beyond the myth lay a more complex truth. tied to the fragile nature of medieval food storage and trust. The manor's larder was vulnerable. Rats, spoiled grain, and the occasional dishonest servant all threatened its contents. Food theft was common, often a desperate act rather than a criminal conspiracy. Servants lived precariously, their wages meager and their position tenuous. Sometimes they pilfered small portions to feed their families. Such acts were risky, punishable by harsh penalties, but also driven by necessity. The Lord's court grappled with these realities. They understood that to accuse was to risk unrest, but to ignore losses threatened the very stability of household and estate. Thus the vanished feast became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in times of plenty, scarcity lurked nearby. It was a story told by firelight to children, warning them about honesty and vigilance, but also about the precarious balance of medieval life. The legend also revealed how rumor itself functioned like a living force in the medieval world. Once the story of the stolen feast spread, it took on a life of its own, shaping perceptions and actions. Fear of theft led to stricter controls, mistrust between servants and masters, and even violent accusations during darker times. The tale was a virus, spreading invisibly yet infectiously through the fabric of society. Yet, amid the suspicion and fear, there was also a strange kind of solidarity. The vanished feast became a shared experience, a common story that bound people together. Villagers from neighboring towns would retell the tale at market days, laughing nervously about the Lord's misfortune, while secretly fearing their own larders. Minstrels composed songs and ballads, turning the event into entertainment and simultaneously social commentary. Historians looking back find in this vanished feast an illuminating example of how medieval communities dealt with uncertainty and crisis. It shows how a single event, real or exaggerated, could ripple through social networks, influencing behavior, inspiring art, and even affecting economic decisions. The feast's disappearance became more than just a lost meal. It was a symbol of vulnerability, resilience, and the power of storytelling. In truth, the feast likely did not vanish entirely. Food may have been stolen, spoiled, or misplaced. Miscommunication may have exaggerated losses, but the legend itself remains vivid, a testament to how medieval people perceived their world and coped with its fragilities. In a time before newspapers, radios, or internet, stories were the lifeblood of communities, carrying warnings, hopes, fears, and identity. So the next time you hear of a feast that vanished, remember that it was never just about the food. It was about trust broken and rebuilt, about the invisible threads holding society together, and about the mysterious power of words to make events live on, sometimes larger, sometimes darker, and always unforgettable. Witch trial whispers, fear and hysteria spread. In the shadowed corners of medieval villages, where fog settled thick among the twisted trees and narrow lanes, a quiet fear took root, a fear that would soon erupt into hysteria and despair. This was the era when whispers carried heavier weight than steel, when suspicion itself became a weapon and the invisible threads of rumor wove tales that could condemn lives. The whispers of witchcraft spread like wildfire, igniting a frenzy that consumed communities and scarred history. Witch trials in the medieval and early modern periods were not sudden outbreaks, but rather slow-burning flames fueled by centuries of superstition, religious fervor, social tension, and human anxiety. The word witch itself evoked dread and fascination, a label applied to those believed to wield dark powers, powers that challenged the natural order and threatened both body and soul. This fear was grounded in a worldview where the supernatural was real and ever-present, where unseen forces shaped fate and fortune. At the heart of these trials lay the belief that the witches had made pacts with the devil, exchanging their souls for forbidden knowledge and malevolent abilities. This notion, fueled by sermons, legal codes, and popular folklore, cast a wide and terrifying net. Anyone who deviated from social norms, possessed unusual knowledge of herbs and healing, or simply aroused suspicion through behavior or misfortune could become a target. In the tight-knit fabric of village life, where everyone knew each other's business, such accusations were devastating. The slightest quarrel, an unfortunate illness, a failed crop, or a child's sudden death could become proof of a neighbor's guilt. Fear bred mistrust, and mistrust bred isolation. The accused were often older women, widows, or outsiders, figures already vulnerable to prejudice and hardship. Yet men and younger people were not exempt, as hysteria swept across regions like a dark tide. The process of accusation and trial was brutal and chilling. Inquisitors, often clerics or local officials, acted as judge, jury, and prosecutor. Trials relied heavily on confession, usually extracted under threat or actual use of torture, which led to false admissions and further accusations. The idea of spectral evidence, testimony that spirits or apparitions caused harm, blurred the lines between reality and imagination, making the trials a theater of fear and fantasy. Public executions were common, serving as grim spectacles intended both to punish and to warn. The accused faced burning at the stake, hanging, or drowning. These events were often attended by large crowds, mixing morbid curiosity with communal catharsis. Yet behind the crowd's gaze lay a fractured society grappling with uncertainty and desperate to find scapegoats for misfortune. Witch trials also reflected deeper social anxieties. Economic hardship, war, plague, and religious upheaval unsettled communities, creating fertile ground for suspicion and blame. The rise of centralized authority and changes in legal systems meant that accusations could escalate quickly beyond local disputes. Religious authorities wielded their power to root out heresy and evil, sometimes with political motives intertwined. Despite the horrors, there were voices of reason and resistance. Some clergy, scholars, and officials cautioned against hysteria, warning that the rush to condemn could destroy innocent lives and corrupt justice. Yet such warnings often fell on deaf ears amid the clamor for security and retribution. The Champion's Tale: How Feats Become Fables. In the age before printed books and mass communication, tales traveled as much by voice as by memory. The medieval world depended on stories told beside hearthfires, shouted across village squares, and sung by wandering minstrels. Among these tales, the stories of champions, those who performed great feats of strength, bravery, or cunning, held a special place. These champions were more than warriors or heroes. They became living legends, figures who shaped the collective imagination and bound communities together. The telling of a champion's tale began in the heat of battle or the quiet aftermath of a heroic deed. Yet the story never stayed fixed in its original form. Each retelling added layers of grandeur or pathos, adapting to the needs and hopes of the listeners. What might have been a straightforward account of a knight's bravery in battle could transform over time into a sweeping saga of divine intervention or supernatural aid. This process of transformation reveals much about medieval culture, where history and myth intertwined and truth often mingled with invention. Feats of arms were central to medieval society, especially within the warrior class. Knights and soldiers were expected to demonstrate courage and skill, often in tournaments or on the battlefield. Success in these arenas could elevate a person's status and inspire tales that traveled far beyond the place of origin. Yet the record of these feats was rarely kept in official documents accessible to all. Instead, bards, troubadours, and storytellers carried these stories from village to castle, shaping them to fit the moods and expectations of their audiences. The blending of fact and fiction served practical as well as cultural functions. Stories of champions served as moral instruction, exemplifying virtues such as loyalty, honor, and faith. They also offered hope and inspiration, especially during times of uncertainty, wars, famine, or political upheaval. In communities where life was harsh and often precarious, these tales provided a sense of continuity and meaning. The champion's tale often began with a challenge or a crisis, a beast terrorizing the countryside, a rival lord threatening peace, or an impossible quest. These challenges were more than mere plot devices. They echoed real threats and conflicts faced by medieval communities. The champion's response, whether by strength, strategy, or courage, embodied the ideals that society wished to uphold. As the tale spread, it acquired embellishments. A successful knight might be said to have fought with the strength of 10 men, or to have been protected by saints or angels. A simple act of mercy might become a grand gesture of self-sacrifice. These embellishments were not lies, but forms of storytelling that enhanced the emotional and symbolic power of the narrative. The role of oral tradition in preserving and transforming these tales cannot be overstated. Before the widespread use of writing, memory was the vessel of history. Storytellers had to capture their audience's attention and imagination, which meant that stories had to be vivid, memorable, and relevant. Repetition, rhyme, and rhythm were tools to aid memory and performance, shaping the structure of tales into poetic or musical forms. This oral tradition also meant that multiple versions of a champion's tale could coexist. A story told in one village might differ significantly from the same tale told miles away, reflecting local customs, values, or rivalries. In this way, tales became living entities, evolving over time and place. The social function of these tales extended beyond entertainment. Champions often became symbols of communal identity, embodying the values and aspirations of their people. In times of crisis, recalling the deeds of legendary figures could unite a community, remind it of its strength, or bolster morale. These stories were sometimes performed during festivals or public gatherings, reinforcing social bonds and collective memory. The written word eventually began to capture some of these tales, especially as literacy spread and manuscript culture flourished in monasteries and courts. Chronicles, romances, and epic poems recorded champions' deeds, often blending historical events with legendary material. The distinction between history and myth became blurred, reflecting the medieval understanding of truth, which embraced spiritual and symbolic realities alongside material facts. One famous example is the Arthurian legends, which mixed possible historical roots with layers of folklore and Christian symbolism. The Knights of the Round Table, their quests, and their battles against dark forces became a potent mythos that shaped medieval and later imaginations. These stories illustrated how champions could transcend the boundaries of fact and fiction to become timeless icons. The process by which feats became fables also reveals the power of storytelling to shape perceptions of the past. What survives in memory is often not a straightforward record, but a narrative shaped by human needs and values. This understanding invites reflection on how histories are constructed and how cultural identity depends on the stories told about it. In the end, the champion's tale is a testament to the human desire to find meaning in struggle and triumph. It shows how communities use narrative to celebrate ideals, confront fears, and inspire future generations. The echoes of these medieval stories continue to resonate, reminding us that every legend begins with a single act of courage, and every fable holds a seed of truth. The noble's gift, a kindness that echoed. In the medieval world, where social divides were sharply drawn and survival often depended on one's rank and fortune, acts of kindness from the nobility were rare and therefore remarkable. The rigid hierarchy of feudal society placed lords and peasants at opposite ends of a vast gulf. Yet within this structure, occasional gestures of generosity sent ripples far beyond their immediate circumstances, echoing in the memories and stories of entire communities. Such acts revealed a different facet of medieval life, the human capacity for empathy and goodwill that transcended status and power. A noble's gift was never merely an item or coin passed from hand to hand. It carried weight as a symbol, a statement that the powerful were not entirely detached from those beneath them. In a world where survival could mean enduring harsh winters, poor harvests, or outbreaks of disease, a single gift might mean the difference between life and death for many. It was in these moments that the nobility could step beyond their roles as rulers and landowners to become figures of hope. The nature of these gifts varied widely. Sometimes it was grain or livestock, given during times of famine to ease the burden of hungry villagers. Other times, it might be a grant of land or the remission of taxes, acts that helped sustain the livelihoods of common folk. Religious institutions also played a role, often mediating the distribution of charity as an extension of a lord's goodwill. Such gifts were not only practical aid, but also gestures that reinforced the bonds of fealty and loyalty between lord and vassal. One well-documented example involved a noble who, during a particularly brutal winter, opened the granaries to the starving people of a nearby village. The gift of stored grain fed countless families through months of snow and frost, a kindness remembered in local chronicles and song for generations. It was not merely the food itself, but the gesture, the breaking of storehouse doors meant to protect wealth, that resonated deeply. It spoke of compassion that momentarily bridged social chasms, of a shared humanity in times of hardship. Such acts were not without political dimension. Nobles often understood that generosity could strengthen their position, ensuring the loyalty of those who depended on them. A well-timed gift might prevent unrest or rebellion, encouraging peace in turbulent times. Yet even when self-interest motivated a noble, the tangible impact of the gift could be profound, saving lives and fostering goodwill. In many cases, gifts from the nobility became the subjects of stories passed down through oral tradition. Villagers recounted how the Lord's generosity had once saved the community from starvation or hardship. These stories grew in detail and emotion with each telling, becoming part of the local identity and history. They were shared during communal gatherings, feasts, and festivals, reminding all of the interconnectedness of their lives. The medieval church also amplified the echo of noble gifts. Acts of charity were often framed as moral obligations and spiritual duties, enhancing the giver's honor and securing prayers for their soul. Religious leaders preached the virtues of generosity, encouraging nobles to act benevolently. Gifts given in the name of faith carried additional significance, promising salvation and divine favor alongside material relief. One striking example comes from the story of a noblewoman who, after surviving a plague that devastated her lands, dedicated her wealth to building a hospice for the sick and poor. This gift not only provided immediate care, but also established a lasting institution that served generations. The legacy of such kindness extended beyond the lifetime of the donor, embedding the memory of goodwill in the fabric of society. The ripple effects of noble generosity were felt in unexpected ways. Peasants who received aid might later offer service or loyalty that strengthened the Lord's position. In some cases, the memory of kindness became a source of communal pride, a story told to outsiders that defined a village's character. These stories also reminded the powerful that their status carried responsibility, shaping expectations for how nobles should govern and care for their people. It is important to recognize that noble gifts were not acts of pure altruism, but operated within a complex web of social, political, and religious obligations. Yet the kindness inherent in these acts, whether motivated by faith, duty, or strategy, left an imprint on medieval life that transcended simple transactions. They humanized the often distant figures of authority and offered moments of hope and connection in a world that could otherwise be harsh and unforgiving. Midnight ghost stories, fear passed from mouth to mouth. As twilight surrendered to the deep shadows of night, villages across medieval lands settled into uneasy quiet. Fires dwindled to smoldering embers in hearts, and the world outside darkened into a realm of mystery and unseen forces. In these moments, long before the age of mass media or printed books, stories, especially those born from fear, traveled by word of mouth. These stories, whispered in the flickering candlelight or spoken in the guarded hush of a crowded hall, carried a particular weight. They were ghost stories, tales of restless spirits, curses, and apparitions, woven into the fabric of medieval life and culture. The telling of ghost stories after dark was not merely entertainment. It was a shared ritual that bound communities together, a conduit through which collective fears, hopes, and warnings passed. In an era defined by hardship, plagues, famine, war, and religious upheaval, the supernatural was a palpable presence in daily consciousness. The line between the living world and the spirit realm was thin, and unseen dangers lurked in the night. Ghost stories were a way to make sense of the inexplicable, to give voice to anxieties that could not be easily spoken aloud. Villagers gathered in homes, inns, and churches, drawing close for warmth and safety, their faces illuminated by candlelight or the flicker of a fire. The storyteller, often an elder or someone reputed to have insight into the unseen, would begin softly, building suspense with every carefully chosen word. Tales might recount the tragic death of a local noble, whose spirit was said to wander the halls of an abandoned manor, or the restless ghost of a betrayed lover who haunted a forest path. These stories were rooted in local history and legend, grounding the supernatural in the familiar. Fear was a central ingredient of these tales, but it was not merely terror for its own sake. Ghost stories served as warnings, cautionary lessons wrapped in chilling narrative. They might warn of the consequences of greed, betrayal, or sin, or caution travelers to avoid certain dangerous places at night. The fear evoked was communal, a shared experience that reinforced social values and boundaries. It was a form of social control as much as folklore, reminding listeners of the moral and physical dangers that awaited the unwary. The spread of these stories depended entirely on oral transmission. Without printing presses or broadcast media, the tale had to be memorable, captivating enough to be retold again and again. As stories passed from mouth to mouth, they transformed, accumulating embellishments or alterations, reflecting the teller's perspective or local context. This natural evolution meant that ghost stories were living narratives, shifting with each retelling to suit new audiences or circumstances. It was this dynamic quality that allowed them to go viral in their own medieval way. One story might begin in a single household but soon reach neighboring villages, crossing the boundaries of parish or county. Markets and fairs were key nodes where news, gossip, and stories circulated freely among travelers, merchants, and villagers. The more evocative or frightening a tale, the more likely it was to be shared and remembered. Some stories became so widespread they formed regional or even national legends, with versions recorded by chroniclers or clergy centuries later. Ghost stories also intersected deeply with religious belief. The medieval church acknowledged the existence of spirits, angels, demons, and souls trapped between worlds, and offered frameworks for understanding their presence. The church's teachings influenced how stories were told and interpreted. Ghosts might be seen as souls in purgatory seeking prayers, or as malevolent forces tempting the living. Priests sometimes played a role in exorcising spirits or blessing haunted places, blending faith with folklore. In some cases, fear of ghosts could spark real social consequences. Accusations of witchcraft or dealings with the devil might arise from suspicions surrounding unexplained events or frightening apparitions. The hysteria of witch hunts was, in part, fueled by these deep-rooted beliefs in the supernatural and the pervasive fear that accompanied ghost stories. Communities could be torn apart by fear passed from mouth to mouth, just as stories traveled. Yet, amid the fear and superstition, ghost stories offered comfort. They acknowledged the mysteries of life and death, and the hope that departed loved ones might linger nearby, watching and waiting. Stories of protective spirits or benevolent ghosts were common, reinforcing faith and offering reassurance that the dead were not wholly gone. This dual nature, fear and comfort, made ghost stories a powerful cultural force. They shaped how medieval people understood their world, connecting the material and spiritual realms. In a time of limited scientific explanation, these tales provided a framework to interpret the unknown and to face the terrors of the night with shared courage. As dawn approached, the stories would conclude, leaving listeners with lingering chills and reflections. The telling was a ritual that transcended mere storytelling. It was an act of communal memory, an expression of collective fears, and a reminder of the fragile boundary between the known and the unknown. In this way, fear passed from mouth to mouth became a thread woven into the tapestry of medieval life, an echo of human vulnerability and resilience across the centuries. The church mishap, a laugh shared by all. In the solemn hush of a medieval church where every whispered prayer and rustle of fabric carried weight, moments of unexpected levity were as rare as they were precious. The church was the heart of village life, a place where reverence ruled and piety was displayed with careful solemnity. Yet, even here, the unpredictability of human nature and the quirks of daily life sometimes broke through the sacred atmosphere, reminding all present that beneath the vestments and rituals, humanity endured with all its imperfections. The tale of a certain church mishap, remembered and retold across generations, speaks to this unexpected laughter, a shared moment of humility and joy that cut through the gravity of medieval spirituality. It is a story that captures the delicate balance between the sacred and the human, and how a simple incident could ripple through a community, becoming a cherished legend. On a quiet Sunday morning, the congregation gathered in the village church, their faces a mixture of solemn expectation and devout attention. The air was thick with incense, and the flickering candles cast a golden glow upon the ancient stone walls. The priest, robed in fine vestments, prepared to lead the Mass, a ritual steeped in centuries of tradition. The service was to be solemn and precise, a moment to commune with the divine and affirm the bonds of faith. Yet as the service unfolded, an unanticipated disruption arose from the choir stalls. The young choir boys, earnest but inexperienced, had been rehearsing diligently, their voices meant to elevate the worship experience. In their enthusiasm, one boy misjudged a step on the stone floor, slipping and colliding with the heavy wooden lectern. The crash echoed sharply, startling the congregation and drawing gasps from many. The priest paused, eyes wide with surprise, as the choir boy regained balance, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. A ripple of stifled laughter spread among the parishioners, quickly replaced by smiles as the tension dissolved. This small human moment became a catalyst for a rare communal chuckle within the sacred space, a gentle reminder that even in the most serious of places, the unexpected could bring lightness. The mishap did not go unnoticed by the village folk beyond the church doors. News of the incident traveled swiftly through the lanes and fields, carried by whispered recounting and eager retelling at the market and the tavern. The story grew with each telling, not as mockery, but as a shared experience that united the community in humor and humility. The boy's stumble became a symbol of the imperfect but earnest devotion that characterized village life. Medieval churches were more than places of worship. They were centers of social life, education, and communal identity. Stories like this church mishap illustrated how the sacred and the secular were intertwined. The church was not a distant, untouchable institution, but a living part of the village, where the rhythms of human experience, joy, embarrassment, laughter, played out alongside prayer and ritual. Such moments of levity were vital. In an era often marked by hardship and strict social hierarchies, laughter could offer relief and foster a sense of belonging. Shared stories of mishaps or humorous events in the church provided a collective memory that softened the boundaries between clergy and laity, young and old, reminding all of common humanity beneath the layers of duty and decorum. Moreover, these stories subtly challenged the idea that the church was solely a place of solemnity. They revealed a community capable of grace, forgiveness, and joy, even in sacred spaces. The ability to laugh together at a minor mishap reflected a resilience that carried through the trials of medieval life: plague, famine, war, and uncertainty. Clergy themselves were not immune to such incidents, and tales of their foibles often circulated alongside those of parishioners. These stories humanized religious leaders who were expected to embody virtue, yet were in reality subject to the same vulnerabilities and follies. The church mishap, therefore, also served as a gentle reminder of humility for all, reinforcing the Christian values of compassion and understanding. In the broader medieval culture, humor was woven into everyday life, from the carnivalesque festivals that inverted social norms to the ribald tales told in taverns. The church, while a place of solemn worship, was part of this cultural tapestry. Moments of laughter within its walls were not seen as disrespectful, but as essential expressions of the human spirit. Over time, the story of the church mishap became part of the village's oral history, recounted at gatherings and celebrations. It was a tale that parents told children to illustrate the grace found in imperfection and the power of shared laughter. It reinforced a sense of community identity, grounded in both faith and the everyday realities of human life. As the centuries passed and the medieval world gave way to modernity, the tale endured, transformed but not forgotten. It stands as a testament to the enduring need for joy amid reverence, the simple delight found in unexpected moments, and the universal truth that even in the most sacred places, laughter remains a balm for the soul. In this way, the church mishap was more than a mere accident. It was a gift to the village, a moment when the divine and the human intersected in a shared laugh, echoing through history as a quiet celebration of life's imperfections and the community's enduring spirit. All set. The pilgrim souvenir, tales from afar. In the tapestry of medieval life, few experiences held as much allure and significance as the pilgrimage. Far more than a simple journey, a pilgrimage was a profound spiritual quest, an outward act of devotion and penance that carried the pilgrim away from the familiar and thrust them into the unknown, along winding paths that threaded through vast landscapes and across diverse cultures. The stories these travelers brought home, tales from afar, were treasures in themselves, shared eagerly as souvenirs far more precious than any physical keepsake. The pilgrimage was a defining rite of passage, an embodiment of medieval spirituality and society's complex relationship with faith, community, and the wider world. For many, it was a perilous undertaking marked by hardships of weather, hunger, and banditry, yet it was also a journey of hope, transformation, and connection. The souvenirs pilgrims returned with were tangible reminders of their trials and triumphs, but it was the stories they carried that truly spread like wildfire through villages and towns, seeds of wonder and belief that traveled faster than any horse or cart. Medieval pilgrims traveled to sacred sites scattered across Europe and beyond. The towering shrine of Santiago de Compostela in Spain, the towering dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the miraculous well of Lourdes, or the shrine of Canterbury Cathedral in England. Each destination held its own unique sanctity and allure, and each pilgrimage left the traveler changed. The souvenirs brought back might be small relics, tiny fragments of stone, a blessed piece of cloth, a carved token, or more often, simply stories embroidered with awe, mystery, and the miraculous. In the market squares and hearts of the villages, these tales became a living thread binding distant lands with local lives. A pilgrim's recounting of strange languages, exotic foods, unfamiliar customs, and wondrous miracles captivated listeners, painting vivid pictures of a world beyond their fields and forests. They spoke of sacred relics guarded by vigilant monks, of healing waters said to cure the sick, of saintly apparitions that defied explanation. The stories were told and retold, growing with each telling, spreading through whispers and conversations, much like the rumors and legends that were the medieval equivalents of going viral. The pilgrim's souvenir was not merely a memento, it was a bridge between worlds. For a village rooted in the rhythms of agricultural life and bound by local traditions, the arrival of a returning pilgrim was an event charged with excitement. The pilgrim was a storyteller and a bearer of news, a living witness to the vastness of the Christian world and the mysteries it held. Their souvenirs inspired faith, fear, curiosity, and even skepticism, weaving a rich fabric of belief and folklore that enlivened the imagination. The stories often carried messages of hope and divine intervention. Tales of miraculous healings or visions of saints confirmed the power of faith and the presence of the divine in daily life. Pilgrims recounted how a touch of a relic or a sip from a holy spring had cured ailments thought incurable. Such stories offered comfort to the suffering and reinforced the idea that the sacred was near, accessible to those willing to seek it out with humility and devotion. Yet, not all tales were purely spiritual or uplifting. Some pilgrim stories spoke of the dangers and deceptions faced on the road, the threat of thieves lying in wait, the cruelty of harsh weather, the exhaustion of travel on foot, and the occasional fraud of merchants selling false relics. These realities reminded listeners that faith was often tested by worldly hardship, and that the path to holiness was neither easy nor guaranteed. The very nature of storytelling during this period meant that tales changed and adapted with each retelling. A pilgrim might embellish an account to emphasize the miraculous, or a listener might interpret a story through the lens of local beliefs and fears. This process of transformation gave rise to rich folklore that blurred the lines between history and legend, fact and myth. In this way, pilgrim souvenirs became catalysts for communal identity and cultural memory. Pilgrimage also held a social dimension, as groups of travelers often journeyed together, sharing experiences and hardships. These groups sometimes included knights, merchants, peasants, clergy, and nobility alike, reflecting the wide appeal and deep importance of pilgrimage across medieval society. Upon returning, pilgrims brought not only stories but also news from other lands, political tidings, and glimpses of foreign customs, broadening the horizons of their home communities. Furthermore, pilgrimage souvenirs served as tangible proof of piety and status. Possessing a relic or a badge from a holy site conferred spiritual merit and social prestige. Pilgrims might wear these badges sewn onto their clothing or carry relics in small reliquaries, visible tokens of their sacred journey. For the faithful, these objects were imbued with sanctity and served as focal points for prayer and devotion long after the journey ended. The culture of pilgrimage also intersected with the medieval economy. Towns along pilgrimage routes flourished as centers of commerce and hospitality, catering to travelers with inns, markets, and artisans crafting souvenirs and religious items. The movement of pilgrims stimulated cultural exchange, spreading ideas, artistic styles, and religious practices across Europe and beyond. In reflecting on the pilgrim souvenir and the tales from afar, we glimpse the medieval world as a place of paradox, rooted in local tradition, yet reaching outward toward distant horizons, marked by hardship yet filled with hope, constrained by rigid social structures, yet enlivened by the stories that transcended borders. These narratives of pilgrimage were early examples of information going viral, spreading across communities through oral tradition, connecting people through shared wonder and faith. Ultimately, the pilgrim souvenir was more than an object or a story. It was a testament to human curiosity, resilience, and the enduring search for meaning beyond the familiar. It reminds us that long before the digital age, stories were the lifeblood of communities, powerful enough to carry hopes, fears, and dreams across vast distances, shaping the medieval world one tale at a time. The laborers' revolt, when voices unite. In the quiet, earth-worn fields of medieval England and across many parts of Europe, a seismic shift was quietly brewing beneath the surface, one that would shake the foundations of society and echo through the ages. This shift was the laborers' revolt, a moment when the voices of those who tilled the soil and labored in the shadows rose up in unison, defying centuries of silence and submission. Though the medieval world is often portrayed as a place rigidly divided by class and bound by unyielding feudal order, history reveals that beneath this surface, the laborers, the backbone of the economy and society, sometimes found a collective strength that could no longer be ignored. The year was 1381, a time marked by devastating hardships and simmering unrest. Europe had been ravaged by the Black Death just a generation before, and though the plague's immediate horrors had receded, its social and economic aftershocks lingered with brutal persistence. The population had drastically decreased, leaving fewer hands to work the land, and yet the burdens on those remaining had not lessened. Lords and landowners sought to maintain their wealth and power by imposing strict controls and high taxes, attempting to force laborers back into conditions akin to serfdom. The seeds of discontent were sown deeply in the hearts of the peasantry. For medieval laborers, life was a daily struggle against poverty, hunger, and oppression. Bound by the feudal system, most peasants were serfs, tied legally to the land they worked, forbidden to leave without their lord's permission, and obligated to provide labor, produce, or money to their lords. Their days were filled with grueling toil from dawn to dusk, cultivating crops, tending livestock, and repairing the very estates they could never hope to own. The hardships were compounded by frequent crop failures, famine, and disease. These conditions bred not only despair, but also a growing sense of injustice. The immediate spark for revolt was the poll tax, a fixed tax levied equally on every adult regardless of income. This regressive tax disproportionately burdened the poorest, igniting widespread fury. When the government demanded yet another round of poll taxes in 1380 and 1381, the laborers' patience broke. Rumors and anger spread through villages and towns like wildfire. The laborers' voices, long silenced or whispered in secret, began to rise openly and forcefully. The revolt was not a spontaneous outburst of chaos, but a coordinated and purposeful uprising, fueled by shared grievances and aspirations. The rebels called for the abolition of serfdom, the reduction of taxes, the removal of corrupt officials, and the establishment of fair wages. Their demands echoed a deep desire for dignity, freedom, and justice, concepts that medieval society largely reserved for the nobility and clergy, but which the laborers now dared to claim for themselves. Led by charismatic figures like Wat Tyler, a skilled and resolute man from Kent, the revolt swept across southeastern England. Thousands of laborers, peasants, artisans, and even some minor gentry joined the cause. They marched on London, the heart of power, determined to confront King Richard II himself and present their demands. This was a bold and dangerous move, challenging the authority of the crown and the established order could lead to brutal reprisals. In our age of instant messages and trending hashtags, virality seems to belong entirely to the digital world. An algorithmic rush, a flash of attention before the next scroll. But long before Wi-Fi and social feeds, the medieval world had its own versions of going viral. News, rumors, songs, prayers, fashions, and even fears spread swiftly through villages, towns, and entire kingdoms, carried by pilgrims' footsteps, merchant caravans, and wandering minstrels. What traveled wasn't code, but memory, imperfect, improvised, and profoundly human. Going viral, then, wasn't about reach, it was about resonance. A tale caught on not because it was optimized for clicks, but because it struck a nerve, filled a silence, or made people feel less alone in the world. A whispered warning about a poisoned well might ripple from hamlet to hamlet in a matter of days. A hymn sung at a shrine in northern France could be echoed in an English village within weeks, not because anyone marketed it, but because it touched something shared. Stories traveled not by broadcast, but by breath. This meant that virality was far more participatory. A tale didn't remain unchanged as it moved, it morphed. Each storyteller shaped it anew. A miracle attributed to one saint in a mountain town might become part of another saint's legend by the time it reached the coast. Gossip twisted into folklore, prayers melted into poetry, and real events became something more, a shared cultural memory. And just like today, not all that went viral was true, nor was it always good. Hysteria, scapegoating, and superstition could travel as quickly as songs and scripture. The same human impulses that drive viral misinformation today, fear, awe, anger, drove them then too. But there was also a quiet kind of virality, the way certain gestures, sayings, or melodies became embedded in the fabric of daily life without fanfare. A rhyme used to remember planting seasons, a charm whispered over a sick child, a phrase that became shorthand for a shared loss. These things didn't sweep across continents, they didn't cause a frenzy, but they endured, and in their endurance, they revealed something more lasting than popularity, meaning. Perhaps the most striking difference between then and now is that medieval virality didn't seek visibility for its own sake. There were no metrics to chase, no profiles to grow. Going viral wasn't a goal, it was an accident of culture, a testament to the power of collective memory. The same story could live for generations without anyone knowing who first told it. And that anonymity wasn't a flaw, it was a kind of freedom. So when we think about what it means to go viral, maybe we should look backward as much as forward. Not to romanticize a world without technology, but to remember that resonance, real emotional, cultural resonance, has always mattered more than numbers. In that sense, a medieval lullaby passed from mother to daughter might have been more viral than any tweet, because it lived, and because someone still remembers it, even now. In the end, the things that truly spread, then and now, aren't just the loudest. They're the ones that meet us where we are, that speak to what we long for, stories that comfort, question, or carry us, songs we hum without knowing why, moments of meaning that echo long after the crowd has moved on. That's what going viral meant, and still means.